Well, good afternoon and welcome back to another live iThemes training event. My name is Nathan Ingram. I'm the host here at iThemes Training, and I am the presenter today as well, as we are talking all about preventing client problems before they happen. Now, we're broadcasting video today, and we're going to be doing that on several webinars. I may do this on the Plugin Roundup as well. So we're adding video to a lot of the webinars here in 2019. I think it's a little bit of fun, so you can kind of get a window into your presenters just a little bit more. And especially with this one, because this webinar, we're going to be talking a little bit about the freelance leap year that's coming up, starting in a couple of weeks here through iThemes Training. And all the freelance leap year webinars are going to be broadcast with Cam as well. So this is just a good introduction to that. So let's get started here. If you're just joining us and go to webinar, several folks just popped in. The chat room is live at iThemes.com/chat. iThemes.com/chat. No, Jesse, no pajamas today. Although, you only see the top half. Who knows what's, I could just have boxer shorts on, but we're going to leave that alone. I actually do have clothes on today. So TMI, absolutely. Okay, so we had a check-in question during the pre-show today about what was your, what was the client problem that you tend to encounter quite a bit. And we actually had 2 of the 9 problems that we're going to talk about today were mentioned there in the pre-show, talking about being stalled with content and dealing with differing expectations from clients. So all of that is part of what we're going to deal with today. And the thing is, if you work with clients, chances are you either have run into these problems or you will. And these are the 9 most common problems, in my opinion, that those of us working with clients tend to encounter as we do so. And this is going to be the content of the webinar today. So we're going to talk about being stalled on content. That is a very common problem among anybody building websites for clients. Then how do you deal with an angry client? What do you do if you have differing expectations with your client about certain parts of the project? What do you do when clients just disappear on you? How about when your attitude gets in the way of working with clients? I'm sure nobody here has that problem, but maybe. What if you have too much work? That can be a real challenge. How about scope creep? Anybody deal with scope creep? We're going to talk about that today. How about clients that just waste your time? We're going to deal with some strategies on that as well. And last of all, we'll wrap up with hero syndrome, which is something I think that affects quite a few of us here today. So we'll wrap up with that. Now, this webinar is leading up to something I'm super excited about. It starts on January the 29th, so about 2 weeks. 2 weeks from Tuesday, we will have this freelance leap year program starting. This is a kind of different approach on one of our premium webinars here. Generally at iThemes Training, our premium webinars are kind of all in one day or 2 or 3 days, kind of focused 2 or 3 hours each day, sort of a thing. What we're going to do, instead of having like one long 3-day event with 3 or 4 hours on that day, we're actually going to stagger the content out throughout the year. And so my challenge to you is make 2019 a year where you grow your business, where you make leaps forward in your business. So every month we will be dealing with various topics on your freelance business. And actually, let me get that page up here today, and I'll show you exactly what those topics are going to be. You can actually click the link over in the sidebar of the chat room, and you can see these things. In January, we're going to be talking about the subject of confidence. In February, the subject of pricing. March is all about marketing. April's about recurring revenue. May is about productivity. June is about problem clients. And then consultations in July. Making systems in your business in August. September is about proposals and credentials. October is finances. November is working with contractors, and December is celebrating the wins of the year and figuring out what is next for 2020. So it's a year-long webinar series where each month we'll be focusing on that topic. There'll be tools and resources for you, as well as challenges and homework each month. And there'll be a Slack community that's specially for the freelance leap year. So we can all grow together in our businesses. If you want more information about that, click the link in the sidebar or just go to nathaningram.com/fly freelance leap year. The cost is pretty reasonable for a year-long course, $29 $29 a month, or $289 for the year. And if you pay the year up front, you get 2 months free. So we start on January 29th. Registration closes February the 5th. But for now, let's dive into these most common problems that we tend to face as we work with clients. Now, the first of those is being stalled on content. So how many of you would say, yeah, that's me. I have been stalled on content with the client. And that's probably everybody who's ever worked with a client, because this is a challenging one. So as we look at each of these topics, these top 9 issues, we're going to look at, first of all, why it happens, and second of all, how to prevent it, right? So why do we tend to get stalled on content? And in my opinion, having worked with clients, I mean, I built and sold my first website in 1995. So I've been doing this a really long time, working with clients, big and small, throughout all of those years. And the reason, at least in my opinion, that clients tend to get stalled on content, there's really two. The first is the client is just simply not a content expert, and they have no idea where they begin, and so they freeze up, right? They get that blank page syndrome where it's just really hard to start writing on a blank page. So they kind of freeze up. Or it could be that the client they just get busy and they avoid the work. When you're busy doing other things, it becomes very easy to kind of kick the urgent project to the back burner and do the things that need to be done. It's also really easy for a client to kick this content project to the back burner when it's really not something they're good at to begin with, and it's a struggle. So it becomes a lot easier to do something that they are good at instead. Now, we can get really frustrated at this. I don't know about you, but I can tend to get frustrated when clients delay because they're stalled on content, and now we're 6 months up the road and the website is still not going to get, finished anytime soon. But I just want to invite you to have a little bit of empathy for your client when you've asked them to give you content for the website. Think about this. How many of you right now have a new version of your website that you've been going to get to for 6 months or a year? Be honest. How many of us stall on our own content for our own websites, and we're supposed to be the professionals, right? We're supposed to be the ones that know how to do this, and we stall on content too. So I guess as we enter into this subject on being stalled on content, just have a little bit of grace and empathy for the client when this is not even their world to begin with. So that's, in my opinion, some of the reasons why it happens. How do you prevent a client being stalled on content? Let me offer a couple of different suggestions. First of all, and if you may have heard me talk about this topic before, but when it comes to content with websites, I adopt what I call a content-first strategy. That means that before we do anything at all on the website, before we start even, replicating the WordPress site from our starter site into the site we're going to build for the client, before we do that, before we do any design, before we do anything at all, the client has to give us all the content 100% before we can take the next step forward. So the way that I do this, and the way that I help clients step through this process with content first, is that I create what I call a content guide. Now, the content guide is basically a really long Word document that asks a bunch of proactive questions about everything that we're going to need to build the website. So, for example, it starts off, if they have a domain name registered already, we ask them for the credentials to log in to the domain. And, we talk about how do you handle email and those sorts of things. But then when we get to the actual content of the site, let's just say, we're talking about the About Us page. How do you tell a client how to write an About Us page? Well, for me, I start asking them proactive questions like, your About Us page is going to introduce your potential clients to your business. So what is it about your business that makes you different? Tell me a little bit about the history of your business. When did you start your business? Why did you start your business? Tell me a little bit about you as the founder. What is your bio? Please provide a picture, a high-resolution picture of you as the founder. Please provide provide pictures of your team members if that's appropriate, or bios for your team members if we're going to do that sort of thing. So it's basically just an overblown checklist that asks tons of proactive questions to get the client started generating the content for their website. Does that make sense? So that's the way I start to deal with this issue of being stalled on content. Now, there's a lot of different ways to do this, and there's all kinds of online services, to manage this sort of a content guide. And, elaborate systems can be good. They can also be bad. Just find something that works for you. For me, the tried and true Word document or Google Doc with all the stuff just right there is the way to go. That way the client can say, I'm finished with the document, and now you have this thing that has everything you need to build the website. Now, it's also possible that you could still be stuck after you've given the client the content guide, because again, they may push it to the back burner. Even with all those proactive questions, sometimes it's hard for clients to articulate what it is about them, that is unique, and really start to put together the identity statement for their business and who they are. It's hard to do. So when that happens, I would suggest working through the content guide with the client in an interview style. Now, sometimes I'll do that with the client. I'll sit down at their office across the desk from them or at a coffee shop or whatever, and I'll start taking notes in Evernote. It's basically all the same questions that are in the content guide. I'll record it in Evernote. That way, if the client says something really great, you can put a timestamp in your notes. Hey, go back to 11 minutes, 32 seconds. That's where the client really said this cool thing. Or if that's not you and you're not really a writer, find a writer locally. There are tons of freelance writers in just about every area across the country and around the world. And so find somebody you can work with and let the writer work through the client interview style through your content guide. It's a really good approach to getting your client unstuck from the content. Now, a couple of questions in the chat. Doug, we'll have all these slides. I'll give to you in a link at the end of the webinar today. And Christine is asking about, is there a download of this content guide available? Not on this webinar. That might be something that we do during the freelance leap year, if we can fit that in. So it's just a proactive list of questions that step them through. If they've got products, you're going to ask for a title and description for every product, any, pricing, sizes, all that. You're just going to ask them questions about what it is that you need to help them start thinking. Does that make sense? So being stalled on content is super frustrating, but it can be prevented with a good system in your business to start collecting the content from the client. Make sense? Any more questions on this one? Okay, let's move to the next issue, which is the angry client. Has anybody in the chat ever dealt with an angry client? This is not fun, right? When a client has some issue and they are just angry and they call and they are not happy. So why does this happen? Let's just suggest a couple of reasons. Could be they're angry because you screwed something up, or they could be angry because, quite frankly, the client is just being unreasonable. Either one of those things can be the case. There might be some other reasons, but let's talk about how do you deal with an angry client. Hopefully you don't have to deal with it much, but the longer you work with clients, doesn't matter how good you are at what you do, eventually you're going to have to deal with an angry client. So how do you prevent it? Or how do you diffuse the situation? First of all, if the client is angry because you screwed something up, then it's really important what you do next. The best thing you can do, if you've made a mistake and the client is angry, apologize and be humble. Just apologize and be humble. Don't try to rationalize, justify, give excuses. That's not going to help the situation. You are not there trying to win an argument. You are there trying to bring the client down from being angry to, being more reasonable. So apologize and be humble. And one of the best things you can do as you're giving an apology, and by the way, this is true for dealing with clients or any other relationship of life, by the way, one of the best things you can do as part of a way to apologize is to verbalize the issue from the other person's perspective. So if the client has cause to be angry at you, If that happens to me, my words, to the client are, I'm so sorry. This was our mistake. I hate that this happened. I know that it caused you these issues. And I'll talk about how I know this impacted the client. That kind of empathy that you share about this issue that the client is upset about, that empathy goes a mile to diffuse the situation and bring a client's anger level down from a 9 to a 3. So be humble, accept responsibility, apologize, articulate the issue from the client's perspective. And that will really go a long way to bringing an angry client down. Now, a couple of things I would suggest as well is, look, if you get that call or that email and the client is upset and angry, do not get defensive. Do not get defensive. Now, I realize that there is there's a type of personality that is very common in the web development space. It's the kind of personality that is usually really, really good with details, but maybe not so good with people issues. And it's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. There's lots of different types of personalities. And if that sounds like you're really good with the details and getting stuff done, you're a task-oriented person, not a people-oriented person, it is likely that you struggle with getting defensive if someone gets upset at you. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's just how you're wired. But what you have to do is learn some skills so that you process the situation differently. Don't get defensive if the client gets upset. Don't start offering, justifications, rationalizations, rules, reasons, all these things if the client gets upset. That's the worst thing you can do. There's an old proverb that says, a soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. So if you come in and start arguing with the client or getting defensive, if the client is angry, that's like pouring gasoline on the fire. It's the worst thing you can do. So one of the best things you can do, on the other hand, is to do what Stephen Covey says, that one of the first of the 7 habits is seek first to understand, then to be understood. In other words, shut up and listen. If a client calls you angry, just be quiet and listen. Let them vent. Even if they say things that are unfair, even if they say things that are untrue, even if there's a reason that these things are a certain way, just let them vent. Let them get it out. Understand them, then you've earned the right to come back and explain a little bit and maybe give some context and, accept blame where blame is yours and tell them, let's figure out a way forward from here. Seek first to understand, then be understood. Does that make sense? Is that helpful? The worst thing you can do is to argue and try to prove your case right out of the gate when you're dealing with an angry client. Now, if the client is truly being unreasonable, what you need to do is stick to the facts. Disengage your emotions from the equation, not drama. Keep the drama out of it. Stick to the facts, scope, price, and process. If the client is being unreasonable, like they want you to add some feature to the website that was not in the original scope of work, and they're being angry about that, well, that's not reasonable. If they don't want to increase the price to justify the increase of work, it's not reasonable. So you can very calmly explain, now this is greater than the scope of work. The scope of work was where we got this price. And so if you want the scope to increase, then the price has to increase as well. Or we have to take something out of the scope to account for this additional bit of work. So you take the emotion out of it. Don't make it personal. Keep the drama out. Just stick to the facts. Scope, price, process. If the client wants you to do something that is outside your normal process, I'm sorry. This is the way we do things. And this is explained in the process in the contract that you signed when we started working together. So don't be afraid to hold them accountable to the commitments that they've made to you. By signing your contract where your process hopefully is explained, you can hold them accountable to that. Just let them vent first, and then very calmly, rationally, with the emotion unplugged, explain, why things are the way they are. Make sense? Doug's got a great point in the chat room. if you tick off a client, they're going to tell other people and your reputation will take a hit. Yeah, and that's true. But, if a person gets that angry, chances are they've gotten angry at other people too, and people might even know them as, an angry person. So, you can balance it out with that. But I promise you, if you approach the angry client the way I've described, pull the emotion out, be empathetic instead, that is going to diffuse 90 out of 100 situations. Okay, the next one along the line is differing expectations. What do you do if you get into a project and all of a sudden the client is expecting one thing and you are expecting another? Why does this happen? By the way, anybody ever had that happen? I have. Frequently, the reason that we have differing expectations with clients, it's our fault, unless the client is just being unreasonable. If there are differing expectations about what we are supposed to deliver, it's usually because we didn't ask enough questions at the beginning. We made assumptions about what the client wanted, and we didn't ask enough questions to uncover the expectations, the hidden expectations that the client brought into the project. Now, it's a different matter if you ask the question and the client answers it, in a different way. And then they come back with a, expectation that's different from their original answer. But usually, if there's differing expectations as we get into the project, it's because I didn't ask enough questions. And so I promise you, if you will start to develop the soft skill of asking great questions, don't be satisfied with the first answer in a lot of these cases. Dig into what the client is really wanting. Ask follow-up questions. Just go, 2 or 3 questions deeper on everything, just to make sure there are no expectations, buried a foot down that you're not aware of. Asking great questions will set you apart from other web developers. I promise you, it is an incredibly useful soft skill. So that's where a lot of times the expectations come from. How do you prevent it? One of the things I suggest is to have a checklist of questions and a consistent process for the initial client consultation. So how many of you go into the client consultation and you have a set list of questions that you ask for every client, every project, every time? Most people don't. If you do, you're ahead of the game. And by the way, just having the list is not helpful. You actually have to ask the questions. And so I've got a long list of questions that I ask every client. And each one of those questions has a reason. This is the subject matter we're going to be dealing with in the consultations month of the freelance leap year. I think that is in July of this year. And so I've got a set intake question checklist. And, you could put that on the web if you want, or whether you're doing it that way, or whether you're meeting with the client one-on-one, which is what I generally do. You want that list of questions to be always there. I mean, why is it that when a police officer is arresting a suspect, they pull a little card out of their pocket and they read the Miranda rights? They do, and they may do this over and over and over. They probably got it memorized, but they want to read it off that card so they know that every time they're doing it the same way and they don't accidentally miss something. Your checklist has to be the same way. It doesn't matter who you are. A pilot that's been flying for 30 years, before they take off the plane, they're going to go through that same checklist one at a time. They could probably recite that checklist to you verbatim, but they use the checklist every single time, every single flight. We got to do the same thing with our intake questions, just in case we don't miss something. So you want that consistent checklist of questions and a consistent process for the way you handle that first client consultation. Now, the other thing that's important to keep expectations on track is frequent communication throughout the project. You want to be, sending clients updates about, what's going on with the project, where things are, if you're delayed, why you're delayed. By the way, if it's the client's fault, you want to let the client know that. One of the best ways that I do that is what I call the 3-sentence email. It's something I send to every active project on a Friday afternoons before I quit for the weekend. The 3-sentence email focuses on past, present, future. Past, present, future. 3 sentences. It's very simple. Past, this is what we did on your project this week. Present, this is where we are, as far as the project stands in total completion. Future, this is what we're going to be working on next week. It takes just a couple of minutes for every client to send that out. I do it every week. And, this is a great opportunity also to remind the client, hey, we couldn't do anything this week because we are still waiting on your content. So it's a good time to do that. But the more you communicate throughout a project, it keeps expectations on track. The other thing that you can do, it's very important, is that you want to give the client opportunities to sign off at appropriate points. And what I mean by that is the process that you use to build websites. Hopefully you have a process. If you don't, that's one of the things we're going to talk about in August as we talk about systematizing your business. If you don't have a process, you need to have a consistent process that you use to do client work, every client, every project, every time. It's going to make you better. It's going to make your client experience better. It's going to make you more efficient. Anyhow, in that process, there needs to be places for the client to sign off at appropriate points. They need to sign the contract, obviously. They need to sign off on the content that they provide to you. When you do some design work and you give them an idea of what the website is going to look and feel like, they need to sign off on that so that right before you get ready to launch the site, they're not coming back going, I really want to change the color on everything on the whole site. No. We did that already. That was in the design phase. Now we're going to launch, so they don't get to go backwards in the process without paying some additional money. So you want the client to sign off. That way expectations stay on track from the beginning to the end of the project. Does that make sense? Any more questions or comments on this one? Preventing differing expectations. All right. The next issue that I see is the disappearing client. Anybody have these? Things are going great and poof, the client's gone and you don't see him again for 6 months. This is a challenging one because disappearing clients can be quite difficult to deal with. And a couple of reasons why this may be happening. Probably it's because the client is just busy and they're chasing the squeaky wheel in their own business or practice. They got other things on, their plate that are of a higher priority at this moment today than the website is. Mike says he's had a client for a year. Can anybody beat that? I've had one for about 14 months before. Anybody beat 14 months for a disappearing client? 2 years, says Christine. that may win the day. But yeah, the disappearing clients are a problem. And what happened, they hire you to build the site. And then, that day when they do all of that, it's a big priority. And then something else comes along and catches their attention and they're focused on that priority. And so it's hard to get them back to the website. It's really, Melanie has had a disappearing client for 4 years. Okay, Melanie, you get the disappearing client award, I think, for today. Wow, that's a tough one. So how do you deal with it? How do you prevent the disappearing client? The first thing I would tell you is, especially when you're first starting out, these clients can provide some real flexibility if you're busy. So what I mean by that is, if you got a lot of work coming in and somebody pays you a deposit and they disappear for 6 months, if you're really busy right now, that can actually, that can be okay. It can really wreck your process later on if you're consistently busy, but especially in the beginning, if you're like in a busy season and somebody wants to kick the site down the road 3 or 4 or 5 months, that could be helpful. The problem with disappearing clients is when they reappear and make demands, because that happens, right? The disappearing client will frequently reappear and they'll think, well, you've been working on this for 6 months. Why isn't there more of this work done? And they conveniently forget the fact that the reason we haven't moved forward on your project is because you haven't given us anything to work with, right? So, they can reappear and, it's got to be done by next week. And that's a problem. So it can be, okay in some senses, but they can really cause issues when they pop back on the scenes. So what I do as far as the disappearing client goes is I over-communicate to this kind of client what I call the pipeline principle, meaning that, and this is in my contract, and this is some of the things that I talk about in those Friday 3-sentence emails that go out. If your project is delayed, whenever you come back to us with what we need to get started again, you're going to be at the back of the line because we have active projects we're working on. We can't just sit on our hands and wait for you to get back with us. Our business has to make money. We have to eat, it's just the way it goes. And so when your work comes back in, it's going to be at the back of the line, and it may take us 2 or 3 weeks to get back to. So, it's going to be in the pipeline, but it's going to be at the back of the pipeline. So you want to over-communicate that to the client so that the expectations of your client stay on track. The other thing you want to do is to make sure that your contract covers client delays. What happens if a client delays 3-6 months? What do? Well, you need to have some good language in your contract to deal with. So and what I do, I have a clause in my contract, like Melanie says, it's a suspended and abandoned clients clause that spells out exactly what happens if a client chooses to delay. If their project is, if we're waiting more than 30 days on something, their project is suspended, which means that we don't do anything else on their project at all until 2 things happen. We have to have, number 1, payment for the project in full. Number 2, everything that we need to complete the website. So we don't move anything until we get those 2 things. If they delay for 30 days, then they have to pay the full remaining balance of the site before we'll continue to build. If they delay for a period longer than that, it's another 60 days, I believe, they actually abandon the project altogether, which means they've lost their deposit and everything else. I've never had to enforce that language, thank goodness, but it's in there should I choose to enforce it. Now, you don't want to be, you don't want to be difficult to work with because there could be some legitimate reasons that the client can't provide content or whatever it is you're waiting on. It could be that, we literally can't get our videographer in here for more than 30 days to do video for the site. That's fine. We understand that. Let's just communicate it so I can arrange my workload correctly. And if your contract is worded well and you have the correct legalese in there, you can arbitrarily enforce clauses in your contract. But you do have to have the right language in your contract. Now, Mike is asking what language did I use? I'll actually, as part of the freelance leap year, I'll be giving you the contract that I use for client work. That is in September. We'll be talking all about proposals and contracts, and that comes out then. Doug is asking, do you send a heads up email when you hit an enforcement milestone? Well, so that's what the Friday emails are about, right? We haven't heard from you for 3 weeks. And if at the end of next week, we still haven't heard from you, your project will be considered suspended and, the remaining balance of the project will be due. So that's what the 3-sentence email on Friday is for. That's when you do that. Now, one more thing I want to share about disappearing clients, and this is just from long, painful experience by yours truly. The longer a project is delayed, the more likely it is to go off the rails. Because the longer a project is not on your client's, it is not in focus for your client, the client is going to tend to forget the details. The chances for miscommunications and misunderstandings are going to go up. The longer a project delays, the more likely it is to go off the rails. So if for some reason you have a delayed project, over-communicating to the client is critical. You got to tell them what's going on and remind them of the commitments that they made to you in your contract. Remind them of the process that they agreed to. You've got to communicate with the client. Does that make sense? So disappearing clients can be a real pain, but those are some strategies that you might use to prevent them. Okay, the next one is your attitude. Now, I hear rumors that sometimes freelance web developers can have a bad attitude about work sometimes. Now, I'm sure none of you have that problem, but just in case maybe you know somebody that does, you can share these things with them. Your attitude can sometimes be a really big challenge when you're working with clients. It could be that you're having a bad day, you're having a bad week. It could be that personal matters are intruding on your work. It could be that you're frustrated with client A and you end up taking it out and being snippy with client B. Does that sound familiar at all? Does anybody struggle with that? our attitude can be a real problem when we're working with clients. So, what do? How do you prevent your attitude from interfering with client work? The first thing I would suggest is if you're having a bad day, step away from your desk, turn off the screen, take a day off. It's okay. It really is. Now, there's enough challenges being a freelancer that we need to enjoy the benefits of freelancing whenever we can. And one of those benefits is if I'm having a bad day, I can walk away, because very, very rarely is something so critical that it has to be done in the next hour. Very rarely in our businesses does that tend to be the case. So you really could step away and come back to it tomorrow. And it is remarkable how a good meal and a good night's sleep can totally change your attitude. Totally change your attitude. So if you're having a bad day, take a day off. Step away. Even if it's just for a few hours. Step away, clear your mind. It's okay. You have permission to do that because you work for yourself. Now, the other thing you might do is if you're already having a bad day and that client calls, and you know what I'm talking about, right? The one that always pushes your buttons the wrong way, the one that you always have trouble communicating with, the one that's always demanding or wanting more or whatever, just let the call go to voicemail. You don't have to answer that call. You don't have to return that email. It can wait. Very, very rarely do the emails that we receive from clients or the calls we receive from clients have to be returned immediately. So if you're having a bad day where your attitude may color your response to a client and you may take out some unwarranted frustration on that client, just wait. Just step away. Wait to return the call. Wait to return the email. It's going to be okay if you do that. Never, ever, ever, ever hit send if you're angry with the client. If you have worded the snarkiest, most sarcastic email that proves your point, that needs to be the best email that you never send. Don't do it. You will always regret sending that snarky email back to a client. It will never turn out well. So if you've got a client that's just pushing all of your buttons, write the email out, but then delete it, okay? Don't send it ever. The one other thing that I would suggest is, and this is a tough one, because how many of you have been in a circle of freelancers talking, maybe it's at a WordCamp or at a meetup or wherever, and you're talking about your clients, and eventually somebody's going to tell a problem client story. And it's a really good, venting can be a good thing, and I understand that, but it's not a good thing usually when you start talking badly about your clients to others. It doesn't work out well, because what happens is there's this tendency that we have as you start to talk badly about someone, whether it's deserved or not. What happens in your mind is that you start to build up a narrative about that person. Oh, they're terrible, they're awful, they're always demanding, blah, blah, blah. And that narrative frequently becomes blown out of proportion, and it becomes a false narrative. And that will start to color your interaction with that client in the future. So my suggestion is, do what your mama told you. If you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. It's just better. Now, if you're in a crisis with a client and you need to vent, I get that. I know there's some benefit to that. But in general, don't badmouth your clients to other people. Plus, you never know who's standing behind you that might know that client. That would be bad, right? Okay. Also, keep a balanced view of your client and yourself, because you have bad days. So does your client. Your client is a human being just like you. No matter how they may appear sometimes, your client is in fact a human being. And they've got families, and they've got challenges, they've got bills to pay, they've got business frustrations just like you. And so if one day your client pops off at you and they're just rude, give them a little grace, give them a little understanding, keep a balanced view, because you have those kinds of days yourself, so give them a break. And remember, last of all, we get to do what we love because of clients. So often in presentations like this, the client's always given a bad rap. I got to tell you, I've got great clients. Occasionally there'll be an issue here or there, but I've got great clients. And I get to do what I love because of my clients. They're paying the money that allows me to spend my time doing what I enjoy doing. And chances are you're the same way. So just keep a balanced view of this whole client thing, and you'll be better for it. Okay. Next item on the list is when you have too much work. Any of you have that struggle ever? It could be that you have too much work all the time. It could be that you have too much work in seasons. Does that sound familiar? Like there'll be times in the year where you're working 12 hours a day and you're barely keeping up. But then 3 months later, it's crickets. There's nothing coming in. And that feast-famine cycle is very common in the freelancing space. By the way, one of the things that we're going to be dealing with in Freelance Leap Year is putting a strategy toward developing recurring revenue, as well as how to manage your finances as a freelancer to account for those very real up and down times. But let's talk about what happens when you have too much work. Why does it happen? Well, hey, you're awesome. Congratulations. You are awesome. People love you, and they're hiring you, but you can't say no. Does that sound familiar? You can't say no to a project. And you take everything that comes in. Or maybe you don't want to say no. You're afraid not to take a project because you don't know when the next project is coming, and so you overload yourself. You're afraid not to take on a project, so you get stressed and you take on too much work, so it causes delays in your other work, which brings on more stress, and everybody around you suffers because of it. Well, it happens, and the better you get in your work and the more of a reputation you build, you'll start to get more work. And when that happens, it could be that it's time to raise your prices. If all of your proposals get accepted, or even 9 out of 10 get accepted, probably it's time to raise your prices because you are not charging enough. That's a whole other discussion. We'll be talking about that in pricing your work during Freelance Leap Year as well. So how do you prevent this issue of having too much work? Again, raising your prices is a great strategy. You'll actually be doing the same amount of work for more money. And by the way, it's January. Let's do a quick gut check. How many of you raised your prices this year or recently? If you haven't raised your prices, on the next proposal, bump it up 10%. I guarantee it'll be accepted. Well, guarantee is a strong word. It will more than likely be accepted and people won't bat an eye. It's time to raise your prices. Raise your stinking prices. Everybody got that? If you don't, you're going to get too much work, which you might think is a good thing, but it will ultimately lead to stress because you can't keep it all balanced. Okay, so if you're busy, don't be afraid to set a future start date. If you're afraid to say no, that's okay. Just say, but listen, it is a regular thing that comes out of my mouth when I'm meeting with a client for the first time. We typically stay 4 to 6 weeks booked up. And so if you sign papers with me today, I'm not going to have time for probably 6 weeks to actually start working on your project. Now, what I've learned, I used to think, that's going to turn the client off. And actually, it had the opposite effect because scarcity can be a strong influencer. When somebody realizes, okay, this is a person that's in demand, and so if I want to work with them, I better get on their schedule, which means they got to get me signed documents and a deposit so they get put on the schedule. Now, here's something else that I learned, and it really goes into that content-first strategy. Okay, what do you do with the client in that 4 to 6 weeks between the time where they signed with you and they gave you money and then when you're actually working? Guess what? That's when you give them the content guide. So I give them the content tools immediately, and I let them work on their content while I'm working on the work that I have. And in a perfect world, and it tends to work out this way more than half the time, right about the time I'm finished with the work that's built up is about the time they come back to me with their content ready to go. And so we just roll right into the project. So that's a way to deal with that. Kind of balance the work out a little bit by, giving them that content first strategy. All right, any other questions or comments on too much work and dealing with that before we move on to the next topic? Okay. Up next is the ever popular scope creep. How many of you have dealt with scope creep before? This is a common problem, and scope creep is all about the client wants you to do something else besides what you agreed on at the beginning. So it happens for a couple reasons. It happens because the client, maybe they get new ideas, or they see something they love, or they have a friend that's in the same business and, oh, they did this on their website and it's working well. We should do this on our website. So the client gets new ideas, or they see something they love. That's one of the reasons it happens. The other reason is the purpose of the project is not well defined. And so the client gets shiny object syndrome of, oh, let's do this, when it doesn't really go back and support the reason why we're building this site to begin with. So these are part of the questions that I ask at the beginning of every project. What are we actually trying to accomplish here? What is going to make this project a success? How do we know this project was successful? What is it that you want your audience to do when they come to your website? How do we manage this? How do we manage this project and know that we're successful? How is it measured? So when scope creep happens, it's usually because there's all these new ideas out there and we haven't really decided what the project is supposed to be. And so it starts to creep. How do you prevent it? Well, first of all, you may not want to. I love scope creep because when the client wants more features, increased scope means increased price. And, usually people get frustrated with scope creep because you have this idea that, okay, the client has hired you to build the site and now the client gets to dictate what the site contains. No. What the site contains and what they've hired you to do should be as bullet points in the scope of work in the proposal with the price that they agreed to. So if the client wants to add something to the scope of work, fine, that's wonderful. It's going to make you more money. But if they want it for the same price, well, that's just unreasonable. No business can operate that way. That's like taking your car into a car mechanic for an oil change, and the mechanic, and then you say, oh, I probably need to get my brake pads changed out too, and expecting the same price as the oil change. In no other industry would you see this happen. So you just have to help the client understand, this price was for this work that we agreed on. So in order to do this extra work, we either have to take something out of the original scope or we have to increase the price accordingly. So, but look, scope creep, I routinely have extra additions on the final invoice for something else the client wants. It's wonderful. Now, if you don't like scope creep at all, it goes back to defining the purpose and audience of the site up front. So if the client gets shiny object syndrome and they find this really cool new thing that they want to do, you can come back and have the discussion of, okay, how is that really going to affect your audience? Is it something you think is cool, or is it actually going to reach the purpose that we agreed on that this site is trying to accomplish? The other thing is asking those great questions at the beginning. A lot of times scope creep happens because, the client sees something that maybe we could have headed off at the pass by asking, about different kinds of things they might want to include on their site at the beginning. So again, a great clear scope of work and explaining the whole concept of scope creep to the client is very important. I even talk about this. I talk about this in my contract, as well as it's one of those bullet points in my checklist of things to deal with in the initial client consultation. I talk about, look, it is normal for for you to see things or us to think of things as we're going through building the project and our understanding evolves. There may be extra things that we want to do or add to the site, and we love to do that. So we can either do that as an addition to the scope of this site with an additional cost on the final invoice, or maybe that's just a phase 2 project that once we get this site launched at this price we agreed on, maybe 3 months later we come back and add this extra feature, and it's, just a little extra project cost. So, it's all about making sure that you and the client are on the same page at the beginning. Okay. For time's sake, we need to start moving on just a little bit. Let's talk about time wasters. Time wasters. Ever had clients that waste your time? These are very frustrating. And it is really difficult to deal with a client who just loves asking questions and they love talking, and it ends up that this 30-minute meeting actually takes 3 hours. Ever had one of those? Time wasters can be frustrating. So why does this happen? A lot of times the client is the stream of consciousness thinker. They're sort of ADD, right? Or they're naturally inquisitive, or they're a control freak and they want to just nitpick every little single thing. Really frustrating. But ultimately, people waste our time because we allow them to. Let me say that again. If a client is wasting your time, it's because you have allowed them to. More often than not, I find that people, and by the way, I've been coaching freelancers for about 4 years now. I've had hundreds of conversations in a coaching environment with lots of different kinds of freelancers across the country and around the world. I do this all the time. And it is, we talk about time wasting clients a lot. And usually you find that the reason that somebody's wasting your time is because you have trained your client to waste your time. So we need to do some things to untrain them. For example, how many of us have free access to our clients where at any time of the day, the client can just call you on the phone and you're going to stop what you're doing, pick up the phone and talk with them? A lot of us do that, especially when you're just starting out, because we have this idea that that's what great customer service is all about. You can do that when you have a few clients, but when you start to grow, it is not sustainable. How many of you answer emails right away? As soon as they ping, they drop in your inbox, you've got this Pavlovian response, boom, I've got to go over here and answer this email. And so you stop whatever you're doing and you go, so we're training our clients that they have immediate access to us and they get an answer for their question whenever they call, whenever they email. So you know what? It's okay to let calls go to voicemail. It's okay to delay your email responses. Matter of fact, I typically do not take phone calls during the day unless I just have an office day where I'm doing piddly office work, catching up on some bookkeeping stuff or whatever. I don't answer the phone. Everything goes to voicemail. The phone number that's on my website for clients is a Google Voice number that goes straight to voicemail every time, and I get an email transcript of it. So I always let calls go to voicemail, and I'll return them a couple times a day, usually around lunch or right after lunch, and then at the end of the day. Same thing for email. I routinely do not have my inbox open. I don't keep my email open. And I also advise people if there's, you don't want to, I suggest it's not the best option to use an integrated email program that has your email and calendar all built into the same thing. Because you may need to have your calendar open, but you don't want to look at email. And I don't care who you are, chances are when that email pops in, it's going to distract you. And so, keep those things separate. I don't have email open at all. As a matter of fact, the email app that I use allows me to delay the sending of an email until later. So if I decide that I'm working late at night, I might be watching TV or whatever, and I want to return a few emails, I do not. The last thing I want is for the client to get an email from me at 9:45 at night. Because what does that teach the client? Well, Nathan works at 9:45 at night. That's a terrible thing to tell them. So if I decide I want to work and I do respond to some emails, I snooze the sending of that email until 8 a.m. the next day. And that way, the client never gets email from me outside of normal business hours. So Ben is saying Thunderbird has a plugin for that. It does. There's a plugin for Gmail that does that. I use a Mac app called Polymail that lets me do that as well. So yeah, I always delay. And by the way, even if a client emails me during the day and I happen to be, watching email for whatever reason at that time, the client is, unless it's an urgent thing, the client is always going to have a delayed response. I may respond to it 2 minutes after it hits my inbox, but I'm going to snooze the sending of it for a couple of hours because I do not want to train my clients to think that they get a response from me immediately. If that's what you do and you think it's great customer service, you are creating a monster because you're now telling the client that the normal response time from you is a few minutes. So just take all that into account. Don't allow clients to waste your time. If you're dealing with someone who truly has no boundaries and they'll call you and that 30-minute call or 15-minute call lasts an hour, schedule appointments with these clients. Don't make yourself perpetually available. If this client wants to call, okay, let's see, maybe you're emailing them or you're turning a quick phone call. I tell you, let's talk tomorrow at 2:30. I have a half hour then. So you set a time frame, you set a date and a time when the call is going to take place, and stick to the time window. Now, here's what I do. This is a little trick that I do. I've got a few clients that are like that, and they'll end up taking an hour when I only have 30 minutes. So what I do is I plan a call for 30 minutes after we were scheduled to talk. So if we have a 30-minute call planned, I will, let's say it's at 2:30 in the afternoon, I will plan a call at 3 o'clock. Even if it's to a friend or my wife, I will plan a call at 3 o'clock. And that way I can honestly say without lying to the client, as we're getting to about, 2:50, 2:55, hey, I got 5 more minutes and I've got to end the call. I have another call at 3 o'clock. So if you have those kinds of clients that tend to be time wasters, hem them in with scheduling. A little tactic like that can work a lot. Okay. Any other thoughts on time wasters? Any other questions? Last but certainly not least is what I call hero syndrome. And we'll have a time of Q&A at the end, by the way, if you've asked a question and we haven't had it answered. Hero syndrome. Now, hero syndrome is when you feel the need to come to the rescue of problem clients to the detriment of everything else in your life. It's like you have this unhealthy need to be liked or to try to fix the client. And so you put on your cape and you come in, here I come to save the day, right? Now, some of you on this call have no idea what this is about. And that's great. You're not wired this way. However, there are some of you who are watching this webinar who know exactly what I'm talking about because you have hero syndrome. And just with those 2 very short descriptions, you know that's you. And I put myself in this category because for many, many, many years, I would work to the detriment of everything else in my life because I wanted the client to be happy. So how do you prevent this sort of thing? The first thing to do is to recognize it for what it is, and that is a kind of codependency. It really is a very mild form of codependency. You're allowing yourself to be mistreated because it makes you feel needed and important. And, you let the client monopolize your time because you want to be the hero and solve the client's problem. And you'll perform even unreasonable requests for the client just so that the client thinks you're this superhero. And that it's poisonous. It will infect the rest of your life. And quite frankly, probably already is. So the hero syndrome, as I understand it, I'm putting a label to something that I'm trying to define in my own world. It can come from a low view of yourself that's fed by imposter syndrome. So hero syndrome is sort of the kissing cousin of imposter syndrome. There's a lot of written out there on imposter syndrome, and perhaps you've heard some stuff about that. So how do you deal with it? And what you have to do is you got to do some work on yourself. You got to build your self-image because this issue is not just in the business realm. This is an issue that's probably affecting every other area of your life. You come in and rescue people that are close to you, often to the detriment of what is good and right with the rest of your life. So talk through these issues with somebody. There is no stigma to seeing a therapist and talking through some of the issues like this that you may find yourself struggling with. You wouldn't think twice about going to a doctor if you had a physical sickness. And you know what? There's no stigma going to talk to a therapist about mental struggles that we have. And it really is all in the mind. And so a great therapist can help you unpack some of this stuff and get a good, healthy view of yourself. Listen, it's good to be helpful. I love to be helpful. I do these webinars to try to, help all of you who are freelance business owners grow your business, do better, get better clients, make more money, have a better family work-life balance. It's good to be helpful. But listen, if your self-worth is centered in how other people view you, you are setting yourself up to be abused by bad clients. People will take advantage of you if you let them. Now, I'm ashamed to say that in the early days of my business, I'd work late at nights, I'd work weekends, I would ignore my family in order to please the client. And that may be you as well. What I learned through many hard lessons was that these kinds of clients were never really pleased. They always wanted more. And I put myself in a very unhealthy situation. Running a service business does not mean being a doormat or being at the whim of your clients. So if you have a tendency toward this, like I do, you need to set strong boundaries around your business. You need to be accountable to someone. And whatever you do, don't try to fix the client, because that is outside the scope of work. You can't fix the client. You can't do it. There are professionals for that. And that is way more than building a website, okay? So just be aware of hero syndrome. And if you identify with some of these symptoms that I've just talked about, talk to somebody about it. It can be really helpful for you. So those are the 9 most common problems that I see freelancers struggling with: being stalled on content, angry clients, differing expectations, disappearing clients, your own bad attitude, having too much work, dealing with scope creep, dealing with time wasters, and then dealing with hero syndrome. Now, we'll get to any last questions in a moment, but before we quit and head to that, I do want to remind you about this freelance leap year offer. It begins January 29th, so just less than 2 weeks from now, Tuesday a week from now, we'll be starting the first of the freelance leap year months. We'll be talking about confidence, and this is a year, 2019, for you to build your business, get focused, and leap forward to really grow your business this year. Every month we'll have live training sessions, and you'll have resources and homework and a Slack community that I'll be participating in as well to help you grow your business. So Christina's asking, do you have to be a developer to get a lot out of this? Absolutely not. This is built for freelance business owners. If you are working with clients trying to build a business doing WordPress in whatever way, I'm going to give you tools to step you through the process and help you grow. Now, you can click the link over there in the sidebar beside the chat, which will get you to the same spot as this URL here, nathaningram.com/FLY for freelance leap year. It's $289 for the year if you pay all up front, or $29 a month. If you do by the year, you do get 2 months free with that. So registration, though, closes February 15th. Christine is asking, will we be using iThemes products? This is not anything to do with plugins and themes and everything like that. This is about freelance business development. Again, the subjects we'll be covering are here on that page. If you'll click the link just to the right, you can see each of the subjects that we'll be talking about. This is business development. I'm not going to be talking about plugins and setting up themes and all that stuff at all, other than maybe some recommendations on what might make your world easier. But this has nothing to do with iThemes products. This has to do with you and growing your business. All right. So that is freelance leap year. Slides for today. Yes, let me get those for you. Just one moment. Tell you what, I'm going to give you a Dropbox link because I don't have the Google Drive open. Here are slides in the chat room today. If you're watching this on the replay, you can click download handout just below the video and download the slides there as well. Christine, what did you mean by giving client content tools? You had to take a call. So I give a content guide that steps the client through the process of creating content for their site. It basically asks a bunch of proactive questions. I want to do a big explanation of that. The replay will be up in about an hour, and I would just suggest going back and watching that portion. Adam, speaking of making clients angry, do you have any specific tips on raising ongoing recurring prices for structured web care packages? Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So especially when we get to pricing, the months on pricing and the month on recurring revenue, we'll be talking specifically about those issues. Kevin, what are your thoughts on giving the client demo content, like for a fictitious website? Hey, if you can do that without a lot of extra work, sure, why not? But oftentimes, here's what you want to be careful of. The nature of human beings is to be lazy. So if you go, let's say there's a restaurant, and you go copy the content off of somebody else's restaurant and paste it on your client's site for starter content, the client's probably not going to change it very much. And if you're actually writing the demo content yourself, you better be charging a lot of money for that, because that's a lot of time. Mike, how do you handle late payments? Man, that's a webinar in and of itself, but there's a clause in my contract about, a certain percentage for late fees and so forth. Late payments, though, I don't have collections issues in my business. And, my business, probably like many of yours, the web business that I do is really mostly about projects and monthly management services. If a client doesn't pay their monthly management service, their site gets turned off. So there's not a whole lot of, not having to chase payments down. And projects don't get launched until the final payment is made, and we don't start until the first payment is made. So by structuring your system, you can really avoid a lot of those collections issues. Will I be sharing sample contracts in Leap Year? Yes, Christine, I will. If you read that, just follow the link there to the right of the chat room, and each of it talks about all the resources you'll get, and my contract is one of those. Doug, example site. Yeah, Astra is a theme that does have a lot of sites. Like click a button and it builds the whole site for you. And there is some, a lot of it's Ipsum type content, but it does have some content there, if that's what you're going to do to build sites. Christine, in Freelance Leap Year, can you jump ahead in the subjects? No, we're going to be covering one subject a month. And the reason we're doing that is so that you take that month to really work that content into your business. And quite frankly, if you try to do more, you're not going to do it as well. So it's a live training session. This isn't a recorded course. There's a live training session each month about that subject. So, and the neat thing about it is, in the Slack community, everybody's going to be working together on that same subject. And so you'll get a lot of good conversation back and forth, and some additional advice from me in the Slack community throughout the month as well. Great question. Any other questions before we wrap things up today? All right. Well, we are about getting close to 10 minutes over today. Hopefully you got some good information out of the webinar today. Preventing client problems before they happen. These are pretty practical issues that I think a lot of us face as we're working with clients. So hopefully you took something away from today. I do hope you'll join me for Freelance Leap Year. That's going to be a lot of fun. Again, starting 1 week from Tuesday. And after February the 15th, registration is closed. So this is something you'll want to jump on right away. Julie, does the Freelance Leap Year include the content guide? It does not currently. However, I think we can make that happen. Yeah, I think we can do that. We can talk about the content guide in the systems month, and I think I can make a boilerplate version of that available. Although honestly, there's nothing magic about it. It's just a bunch of questions, but I can give you a jumping off place for that, sure. I mean, look, my goal in Freelance Leap Year, honestly, is to help you grow your business. My mission is to help freelance web developers grow their businesses so that your business fuels your life. Whatever your life needs to be right now, whether you're, just need to work part-time to bring in a little extra money, or whether you're trying to make the leap from a full-time job to freelancing full-time, or whether you're already full-time, you just need to make more money. I am a firm believer that, in having your own business, being your own boss, not being beholden to some other business's employment strategy for whether or not you're going to get a paycheck or not, be in control of your own destiny, run your own business, do things well, you set your own mission and values, and you do great work for the client. There are problems that come up along the way, and those are the problems I like to help blow up, to help you get those obstacles out of your way so you can really grow your business. All right. So, hope you'll join me for Freelance Leap Year. Thanks for hanging out with me for the last hour and 10 minutes or so, and I will see you next time here on iThemes Training, where we go further together.